Okay, here we go. Welcome everyone to our new series, Journey Through the Books of the Prophets. We begin with the book of Yehoshua, and it's like Hashgacha Pratit, it's divine providence, because the Haftorah for Simchat Torah or Shmini Atzeret, depending if you're in Israel or outside, was the first chapter of the book of Yeshua. Why? Because on Simchas Torah, we end the Torah, and then we begin it again. And so the Haftorah is from the beginning of Yeshua. So I'll read the first verse, and we'll see how much it's connected. Vayehi achrei mot Moshe Eved Hashem, and it was after the death of Moshe, the servant of God. V'yomer Hashem el Yehoshua bin Nun misharei Moshe lemor. That God spoke to Yehoshua bin Nun, the servant of Moshe, saying, Moshe avdi met, v'ata kum avar et Yarden hazeh, ata v'chol ha'am hazeh el ha'oretz asher anochi noten lehem lebnei Yisrael. So what did God say to Yehoshua? He said, my servant Moshe has died. Now you get up, rise up, stand up, and cross the Jordan, this Jordan River, you and all of the people, to the land that I am giving to the children of Israel. That's how the book of Yeshua begins. So let's have some background here. We see clearly that Yehoshua takes the place of Moshe as the leader. But this happened already in the book of Devarim, where once God told Moshe, you will not be leading the people into the land. So Moshe approached God and said, please appoint someone in my place. You can't have a flock without a shepherd. And God said, choose Yehoshua. The Midrash says that Moshe, in his heart of hearts, hoped that one of his sons would be chosen, even though the Torah tells us very, very little about his sons before and after. They're a little bit of a mystery. But God said, choose Yehoshua. And he said, because Ruach Bo, he has spirit. And Rashi explains, what does that mean? He had spirit. So Rashi says that Yehoshua had the ability to relate and meet every person according to where they were holding. His spirit was that he could connect to the spirit of everyone, and everyone felt comfortable. Here in the second verse, we have two expressions. One, two times, Moshe is described as Eved Hashem, the servant of God, and Yehoshua is described as the one who served Moshe, in modern Hebrew, his Gabbai, his assistant. And in the Torah, it says clearly in one verse that Yehoshua never left the tent of Moshe. In other words, he was at his side the whole 40 years. He's the only person that we're told filled this position. Not only did he serve Moshe and assist Moshe, but he was, in a sense, his top student. Because he was always there. And it's interesting because the Gemara says that more than a student learning from his Rebbe is the aspect of I'm using the word serving him, meaning being so close to him that he can see how he lives his life, not just how he teaches Jewish law, but how he lives the Jewish law. And so therefore, that is really who Yehoshua was. Yehoshua was just present throughout the 40 years in the desert. And he not only learned from Moshe, but he was able to see how Moshe lived the Torah that he was teaching. It's a very, very important concept. Here we're clearly in a transition. The first two verses, Moshe has died. Yehoshua is now the new leader. So it's a very, very interesting discussion in the Gemara, Baba Batra, 15th page, if anyone wants to look, as to who wrote the last 8 verses of the Torah. Now, we would assume that Moshe wrote the entire Torah. Wrote is not even actually the proper word. It's more like he transcribed what God told him to write. He was God's scribe. So we assume that the whole Torah was dictated from God to Moshe. So why would there even be a question about the last 8 verses? Well, if you look at the last 8 verses, it describes Moshe's death and the aftermath. And the Torah is talking about who Moshe was and how the people mourned for him. So the Gemara was like, how could it be that Moshe wrote about his own death? Now, some people, some of the sages, did not have this problem. Just like Moshe wrote the whole rest of the Torah, he only wrote what God told him to write. So why would we have a question? Okay, it's talking about Moshe's death, but still, we assume that Moshe wrote it. But there were many sages based on oral traditions that Yehoshua wrote the last 8 verses of Devarim, the last 8 verses. And in this Gemara, which we're not going to discuss at length now, they asked the same question about many of the other books, because some of the books of the prophets also end with the death of that person. And so the Gemara asks, did they write those last verses, or did someone else write them? It's a very, very interesting discussion. But here, I'm just trying to emphasize that there is a major transition happening here between the end of the Torah and the beginning of the books of the prophets, the end of 40-year leadership of Moshe, and the beginning of the leadership of Yehoshua. So that was in the first 2 verses. There is 2 different versions. How old was Yehoshua when he became the leader? One version is he was 82 years old. The other was he was 96 years old. Now, we shouldn't be surprised because Moshe lived to be 120. And one of the last verses of the Torah describes that Moshe was still bodily very strong. He didn't die because he was old. The Torah specifically says that he was still strong in body and he had all his natural fluids. So here, and God only appeared to Moshe at the burning bush when he was 80 years old. So here there are 2 different versions, how old Yehoshua is when he takes over, either 82 or 96. Before we dive into the book of Yehoshua, let's learn a little bit about who he was, because he is mentioned a number of times in the Chumash. We're not going to go into great detail, but it's important to understand that it's just It's not like Yeshua is coming on the scene now, a complete unknown. As we said already, he was clinging to Moshe for 40 years. Wherever Moshe went, Yeshua went. And everyone knew that. But we also know that when we were first attacked by Amalek, when we came out of Egypt, so Moshe appoints Yehoshua to lead the battle. And if you remember, Moshe stood up on the mountain, and Hur and Aaron stood at his sides, and Moshe lifted up his hands in prayer. And the Torah says that when he lifted his hands, Israel was triumphant. When he let down his hands, then Amalek began to be victorious. And so Yehoshua, Aaron and Hur held his hands up so that we would be victorious. But it was Yehoshua who led the battle. Yehoshua was one of the 12 spies. And we're going to see very soon, it's somewhat surprising when we get to the second chapter, because Yehoshua sends spies to spy out Jericho. So that we'll get to. But he was one of the 2 spies that objected to the evil report of the 10 spies. He and Caleb ben Yefuneh. Those are the 2 that spoke out and said, of course we can go to the land. Of course we will be victorious. The other 10 planted the seed of doubt into people's minds, and they bought into it to the point where they said, let's choose a new leader and let's go back to Egypt. The spies are telling us there's no way that we'll be able to conquer the land. But it was Yehoshua and Caleb that stood up and confronted the 10 spies and spoke to the people, encouraging them. And the one other place that we see Yehoshua is that when Moshe complains that he can't bear the burden of the people himself anymore. So God acquiesces and says, choose 70 elders. And there was a process by which Moshe chose 70 elders to help him with judgment and ruling the people. And there were 72 candidates, but only 70 could be chosen. And 2 of them opted out because they, for whatever reason, they thought they weren't on the level or they didn't want to be any disagreements. And that was the 2 prophets in the book of Numbers, Eldad and Medad. And the Torah says they began to prophesy in the camp. And Yehoshua runs to Moshe and says, stop them. They're prophesying in the camp. And in an incredible answer, Moshe says, would it be that all the people were prophets? So the question is, why was Yehoshua so upset? Why was it just 70 elders were just chosen? And the Torah says that Moshe, as it were, transferred from his Ruach HaKodesh, his divine inspiration and prophetic abilities, onto the 70 elders. So why was he upset that these 2 were prophesying in the camp? So Rashi brings the tradition. What were they saying? They were saying Moshe is going to die, and Yehoshua will lead the people into Israel. And Yehoshua, that's the last thing he wanted to hear. He is the most loyal student and servant to his Rebbe. So you see the great is to be the prince. So it's pointed with the word Yehi after the death of Moshe. And the sages tell us okay. Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, good. Vayihi it. So here to the end of Devarim, it says that when Moshe died, the people mourned for death. So if it blinks off again, you'll know what's going on. There's nothing I can do about it. So obviously the people are upset. They're sad. Their leader of 40 years just passed away. And that is, even Yehoshua, like a shadow. The Midrash says that when Moshe died, 3,000 halachas were forgotten. 3,000 halachas were forgotten. Even though you couldn't have had a better student than Yehoshua. But with the passing of Moshe, 3,000 halachas were forgotten. And that's one of the reasons why the book begins with Vayihi. And so it's brought down in a different midrash that compares Moshe to the sun and Yehoshua to the moon. That with all of Yehoshua's greatness, and he was truly great, but he reflected Moshe's light, like the moon reflects the light of the sun. And that was perfectly okay with Yehoshua. He didn't want anything else. He became the leader like many, many leaders in Israel. Even Moshe himself argued with God for an entire week at the burning bush whether he should or could be the leader. And Moshe did his best to get out of it. And we see this throughout history. Some of the greatest Jewish leaders to this day didn't we're so used to politicians grabbing power wherever they can, dictators, etc., despots. Everyone wants the power. But by Jewish leadership, it's actually quite the opposite. So Yehoshua becomes the leader only because God established that he would be the leader. Okay, so a lot of this is an introduction. And what we'll see in the rest of the first chapter, we are not going to be going verse by verse, but the rest of the first chapter is God telling Yehoshua that you're going to cross over the Jordan. Your task is to conquer the land. to the point where he even says, any place that you place your foot, that will become Eretz Israel, all the way to the Euphrates. And if you remember, that was call it the territory that God had promised to Avram, but are called the big borders of Eretz Israel. We saw just a day ago how Israel stretched all the way to the Euphrates in their attack on Iran, quite literally, because they first destroyed radar and anti-aircraft in Syria and in Iraq in order to have a safe route to Iran. So here, right in the book of Yehoshua, he says, wherever you place your foot, you will be able to conquer. We have to say, though, as we go through the book of Yehoshua, Yehoshua not only was unable to conquer the larger borders of Israel, even the smaller borders of Israel, he had a very hard time. He was successful in a certain measure, but the book of Yehoshua makes clear that he was not able to conquer all of the land. And we see to this day, we have some of the same problems. Then I do want to read the 8th verse, though. The 8th verse, in the middle of God like giving encouragement to Yehoshua, he said, I'll be with you. Like I was with Moshe, I will be with you, and you will cross into the land that I've promised the Jewish people. And you should be strong and strengthen yourself. But in the 8th verse, in the middle of this, God says to Yehoshua like this, Lo yamush sefer Torah zeh mipicha, v'hagita bo yamam v'layla, leman tishmor la'asot k'chol ha'katuv bo, ki az tatzliach et derchecha, ve'az taskil. So God says that the words of the Torah should never leave your lips. And you should be involved in learning Torah day and night. And you should guard to do everything that is written in the Torah, because from this you will be successful in your mission. And through this, you will have the intellect of how to be successful. So this is such an important idea here, is that here God is encouraging him in a certain way to militarily to conquer the land. But he makes it very clear that the source of your success and the source of your ability to be successful is dependent on your constant attachment and learning of the Torah. And this has gone with the Jewish people throughout history. I'm sure some of you have seen, we've been at war for a year, but there have been all kinds of short video clips of the soldiers in Gaza and Lebanon blowing the shofar during the month of Elul, making Sukkot, shaking Arba Minim. In other words, being at war, as hard as it is, doesn't cancel the priority of being connected to Torah. And here God is saying just the opposite. That is the source of whatever success you'll have, is through your loyalty to the Torah. The first chapter ends with God telling Yehoshua, in another 3 days, tell the people to prepare, because in another 3 days, you will be crossing the Jordan. So here we have two important dates. God comes and speaks to Yehoshua on the 7th of Nisan. Why is this important? Because we learned at the end of the Torah that Am Yisrael mourned for Moshe for 30 days. According to tradition, Moshe passed away on the 7th of Adar. A full month later is the 7th of Nisan, and we're told of all the prophets that when a person is in a state of sadness or mourning, prophecy cannot be received by them. That's why Yaakov, when he thought Yosef was dead for all those years, 22 years, he had no prophecy. Only when he heard that Yosef was still alive did he become a vessel for prophecy once again. So the book of Yehoshua begins on the 7th of Nisan. And now God, at the end of chapter 1, is telling him, tell the people to prepare for 3 days, because in 3 days you'll cross the Jordan. So we cross the Jordan. It's a very, very important date. On the 10th of Nisan. Now, obviously, this is right before Pesach. The 10th of Nisan. What's important of the 10th of Nisan? If you remember, when in the book of Shemot, of Exodus, when God comes to Moshe and tells him, tell the people to get ready because the last plague is coming, and then Pharaoh will set you free. And part of the instructions, this is how we kept the first Seder of the matzah and the moror and the korban Pesach, the Paschal offering. But God said on the 10th of Nisan, you should take a sheep or a goat into your house and be prepared to slaughter it and take the blood and put it above the doorposts and your lintels. That was the 10th of Nisan. So it's very, very significant, symbolic that we are going to cross into Eretz Yisrael on the 10th of Nisan. One other thing that happened on the 10th of Nisan, it's not necessarily connected here, but according to tradition, Miriam passed away on the 10th of Nisan. The end of chapter 1 is that, if you remember, going back to the book of Bamidbar, that when we conquered the area on the other side of the Jordan, that 2.5 of the tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, asked permission that they should settle there on the other side of the Jordan. And Moshe's reaction was, you're going to settle here and let your brothers try to conquer Eretz Yisrael by themselves? That's not correct. And they worked out an arrangement that the 2.5 tribes did in fact settle the other side of the Jordan. And we should just know, historically, when the Balfour Declaration was signed and announced, the land of Israel was supposed to be what we call Israel and all of Jordan. That was in the Balfour Declaration. All of Jordan, because of its biblical roots, was going to be part of the land of Israel. So here in the book of Joshua, so Yehoshua reminds the 2.5 tribes. In other words, we're about to cross the Jordan. You have to remember the promise. And what was the promise? They promised they would cross into Israel with all the other tribes, and they would fight with them until the land was conquered. And only then would they return to their families and settle the other side of the Jordan. So that's how chapter 1 ends. Chapter 1 ends with Yehoshua reminding them, you also get prepared for 3 days because you have to keep your promise. And they agreed. He had made a promise and they agreed. So now we start chapter 2. And here I'll just read it. Vayishlach Yehoshua bin Nun min Shittim, Shnaim Anashim Miraglim, Cheresh Lemor, Lechu Ra'u et Haaretz, Ve'et Yericho, Ve'yalchu Ve'yavo Beit Isha Zona, Ushma Rachav, Ushkavu Shama. And Yehoshua sent from Shittim, that's a place that they were on the other side of the Jordan, a place called Shittim. He sent 2 spies and he told them, go and see the land and the city of Jericho. And they went and they came to the house of a woman, and now we're going to discuss Isha Zona. There are 2 interpretations. In Hebrew, throughout the Torah, a Zonah is a prostitute. But also the word Zonah comes from the word to nourish, to sustain. In the first blessing that we say after we eat bread, so the blessing is Baruch Atah Hashem Hazan et Hakol. Blessed are you, God, who provides for everyone. So that's the same root here. She's called Zonah. So there's a disagreement. Does it mean that she was a prostitute and she was running a house of prostitution? Or does it mean that she was running a hotel? So there are 2 different opinions. I have to say that we'll call it the majority opinion, especially according to the Midrash, was in fact that she was a prostitute. And this hotel that she was running was a very, very famous hotel. And the Midrash says there was no king anywhere in the Middle East that had not slept with Rachav. It's recorded that she was one of the most beautiful women to ever live. She was considered incredibly beautiful, and she was desired by all of the kings. All of the kings made a point of visiting her hotel. So in a certain way, both opinions could be true. She was both a prostitute, but here we'll call it a very high paid, high level prostitute. There are probably more cleaner words for that. But at the same time, she did run this hotel, and that's where they went to. That's where they went to. So the question is, why did they go there? Why would they put themselves in a situation that they were in this place? So one of the answers is that they're spies. The people of Jericho, they know when strangers are walking around the streets. Everyone knows each other. So Jericho was a very, very famous city. And as I said, this hotel was also very famous. So they had the idea, so that they won't suspect us as spies, we'll just go to the hotel like any other traveler would do. Instead of trying to like sneak around the alleys, etc. Here it just says he sent 2 spies. The question is, who were they? Who were they? So according to tradition, they were Kalev. Kalev is the other spy with Yehoshua, who's one of the 12. And he came back with a realistic, good report. So he's sent again. And Pinchas, of course, was famous for stopping the plague in Israel when, again, here we're talking about prostitution, when the daughters of Moab came and enticed the Jewish men. And there was a whole, we'll have to use the word, orgy going on. And Pinchas was able to stop the plague. And even Moshe at that time didn't know what to do. So those were the 2 people that Yehoshua sent. But the question that's asked in the Midrash is, why did he send spies? The first time caused so much problem. So one answer is the 2 spies that he sent, he could implicitly trust. He had no question that they would come back and say, no, we can't defeat Jericho. We shouldn't cross the Jordan. And so if we go back to, well, why did Moshe send spies? So it's explained that there's 2 reasons to send spies. One is if, let's say, you're not sure if you should go to war against a certain nation, or you should defend yourself in a certain way, or preempt, or the strategy of war. And so you could actually send spies, and they could come back and say, now's not the time. This is not a good time. We should wait. Maybe there'll be a better time. But here, there's a different reason for sending a spy. Like, you're determined that you have to do what you have to do, but you need information. You need to know about the enemy. And so that's what Yehoshua did here. In other words, he wasn't afraid of making the same mistake that happened the first time. And there's actually an opinion. We know this idea that Moshe was not allowed to go into the land because he hit the rock to bring out water instead of talk to it. But there are other opinions that it was also connected to him sending the spies. That if we look carefully at what he told the spies to look out for, he planted the seed in their heads that they were like the first type of spy. Like, maybe we can't take over the land. Maybe it's better for us to stay in the desert. Maybe we should wait for another generation. So Moshe's instructions were not 100% clear. Again, this is just one opinion. It's a very, very complicated question as to why he sent the spies and what their motivations were. And it's a very, very complex. I believe we discussed it in Pathways Through the Orchard. But here, that's how chapter 2 begins. And in fact, the whole second chapter is the whole incident of the 2 spies and their interactions with Rachav and what happened. So I'm just going to briefly go over what was said and what happened. So first of all, when they come to the hotel, Rachav, she wasn't just beautiful. She was extremely smart and sensitive and actually very spiritual. And here I will introduce an amazing thing, even though it's not written here explicitly, but there is an absolute tradition that Rachav converted and married Yehoshua. It sounds very surprising, but you'll see in the second chapter, she says very clearly, she says, I see what's going on here. The Jewish people are meant to have Eretz Yisrael. And I also understand that your God is the God of creation, of the universe. And she says, therefore, I'm going to help you. But I'm only asking one thing, that when you come and you conquer Jericho, and you conquer the land of Israel, you'll spare myself and my family. That's all I'm asking. And she said that because before this conversation, the king of Jericho heard already these two people show up. And even though they were, trying to like fit in and like we're just, travelers like anyone else, already the king heard, we think they're spies here. And everyone had heard that Israel was approaching, coming into Israel. And so the king comes to Rachav and says, I heard you're hiding spies. And she says, God forbid, I'm not hiding spies, but yes, these two people showed up, and I myself suspected them, and they caught wind of the fact that they were suspect, and they fled. So she said, quick, organize a party and chase after them. I'm sure that they escaped already, but you'll be able to catch them. And so the king bought into this, and he had a search party, and he left the walls of Jericho looking for the two spies. And she was hiding them on the roof under flax. She had a huge pile of flax on the roof. And then she tells this whole story to them. And in short, they agree that in payment for your hiding us and allowing us not to be caught, we will save your family. And this is a very famous part of the story. Her hotel was right on the walls of Jericho. And so they said, you'll hang a red rope or material from your window, and we will tell everyone in Israel who will be attacking Jericho that the window from where this red cord is hanging, don't touch them. And so she actually gathered, we're not going to learn about the attack in Jericho for a couple of chapters. But here, she agreed. She was going to gather her whole family into this one room or apartment. And when Israel destroys Jericho, they would be saved. And that is what happened. They kept their word, and they were safe. But I realized I didn't finish the thought that she ends up marrying Yehoshua. The Arizal explains, going back to the story of Yosef and the wife of Potiphar. And we see that the wife of Potiphar is determined to have relations with Yosef, to the point where he almost goes through with it, but he doesn't. And so the Arizal explains that, like most people, human beings are very complex, and we have different motivations. A person could have a very spiritual, holy side, and a healthy, evil inclination. So he says that the wife of Potiphar, she had a prophetic feeling that she and Yosef were meant to be together. The other part of her was driven by pure desire, physical desire. But there was a part of her that actually had a prophetic sense that she was attracted to Yosef, not just physically, but also spiritually. So the Arizal explains that the soul of Yosef returned in the soul of Yehoshua. And the good part of the soul of the wife of Potiphar returned to Rachav. And this explains that Rachav, in her present situation, also had a part of her that was driven by pure desire, but there was another part that longed for something more spiritual. And so when she understood that Israel was coming into the land, that holy part of her very much wanted to connect to it and to leave her previous life. And amazingly, she ends up marrying Yehoshua. And it says in the Talmud that the descendants of Rachav produced 8 high priests, meaning that along the way, some of the daughters produced from the line of Yehoshua and Rachav married Kohanim, and 8 high priests come from Rachav. This is like an amazing statement, but it's a very, very profound idea about a person's ability to change, a person's ability to conquer their evil inclination, and to recognize light when they see it. And not only that, I don't have in front of me right now a whole list of prophets come from Rachav, and one of them was Jeremiah, one of the greatest of all the prophets, comes from Rachav. So this is just an amazing thing, and it also shows that the status of a convert, that actually some of the greatest souls in Jewish history come from converts or the lineage of converts. So this is an amazing thing, including King David, and including Mashiach ben David. So we learn a lot from this whole story of Rachav. One second. So I just want to read one of the verses of Rachav when she's talking to the 2 spies, and says, Ki Hashem Elokechem hu Elokim b'shamayim mima'al ve'al ha'oretz mitachat. She says, because God, your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth below. I'm going to read this again in Hebrew, and you might recognize these words. Hu Elokim b'shamayim mima'al ve'al ha'oretz mitachat. This was incorporated into the Aleinu. We end every prayer service with the Aleinu prayer. And these words of Rachav are incorporated in that God is the God in heaven above and on the earth below. So here, this is coming from Rachav, which is just really an amazing thing. So with this, we have reviewed the first two chapters of Yehoshua. Of course, we are going to continue. And at this point, I am going to stop the recording. And then I'm going to start immediately. And we are going to learn the first two Haftorahs. As I mentioned, we already heard the Haftorah of Bereshit. And this coming Shabbat, we'll hear the Haftorah of Noach. But I didn't want to start with Noach. So we're going to do Bereshit and Noach, and then continue with our usual discussion group. Okay. Since I'm recording this, I'm going to announce it again. Welcome everyone to our short review of the Haftorah of the weekly Torah portion. Here we're going to begin with the Haftorah of Bereshit, and we are going to keep it relatively short, but I want to give just a minute introduction to why do we read the Haftorah and what is the Haftorah. The Haftorah is a section of the books of the prophets, not the writings, only from the books of the prophets, that mirrors the content of the Torah portion of the week. The Haftorah will always be connected to one of the themes. Certain Torah portions have many, many themes, many, many mitzvah, many incidences. But the Haftorah will always be connected to one or more of these incidences. Where does the tradition come from to read the Haftorah? It comes from, there's actually two major opinions, and they're both probably correct, is that at the time of Antiochus, the Greek ruler at the time of the story of Hanukkah, when the Greeks put tremendous pressure on Israel not to keep the Torah and try to force them not to keep the Torah. And so it became forbidden for Jews to gather and read the Torah. And they would send guards, and they were very brutal. So it became a tradition, if we can't read the Torah, we should read a section of the prophets. That they haven't forbidden. And so it became a tradition, and it was actually a relatively short time in Jewish history that this decree was applicable. But there are many different cases where we have what's called a consciousness of remembering Jewish history by keeping going a certain tradition, even if it lasted just for a short time. The second opinion is, at the time where they began reading the books of the prophets, along with the Torah portion, is the Samaritans at that time were a very, very strong force in Israel. And they were remnants of the 10 tribes. And they believed only in the 5 books of Moses. And they did not accept an oral tradition. And they did not accept the books of the prophets. They just based their whole religion around the 5 books of Moses. And so in many cases, they kept the same laws as Jews do. But in many cases, because they didn't accept the oral law, they didn't. And so one of the opinions is because they were such a strong force, we began to read along with the Torah portion a part of the prophets to emphasize that the prophets, the books of the prophets, are also part of our Tanakh, part of our tradition. And they were written not like the 5 books, which was dictated by God, but all the books of the prophets were written with divine inspiration. So that's just the background of why we read the Haftorah all together. It took, truthfully, many, many generations until it was firmly established which portion of the prophets do we read for each week. And for example, if people have the Art Scroll, so you'll see very, very clearly that, and you see this already in Bereshit and Noach, where in the Haftorah, you go up to a certain point, and then it will say that Ashkenazim end the Haftorah here, but Sephardim and other communities, and sometimes I'll even name them, continue to a different point. So even today, we have different opinions as to how much of the prophets we're reading. So in Bereshit, the obvious theme of Bereshit is God as creator of the universe. That is the obvious theme. And everything that exists in the universe, from mineral, plant, animal, and human, everything comes from God. So how does the Haftorah begin? By the way, it's from Isaiah chapter 42, verses 5 until 43:10. So it starts, Ko amar ha'el Hashem borei hashemayim. Thus says God, the creator of the heavens, the notehem rokah ha'oretz, and the one who spreads out the earth, b'tza'atzeha, and everything that exists in the heavens and the earth. Notei neshama la'am, he gives soul to human beings that exist on the earth. V'ruach laholchim ba, and a spirit for those who walk there. So here immediately we see in the first verse this idea of referring to God as the creator. Interestingly enough, you don't see it that much in the Torah. I don't think in the Torah itself, it doesn't mention God as creator in that sense. In fact, everyone asks about the first of the 10 commandments. I am the Lord your God who has taken you out of Egypt. And many of the commentaries point out, it doesn't say, I am God, your creator. It's not just that I created, but I'm still actively involved. I took you out of Egypt. So here, even in the book of the prophets, you don't see the actual reference to God as creator that often. That's why this Haftorah was chosen. Then a few verses later is one of the most important statements of really all of Judaism. Ani Hashem karaticha b'tzedek v'yachazek b'yadecha. I am God who has called you in righteousness, and I will strengthen your hand. V'yetzarcha v'yetnecha lebrit am, and I will establish with, and I will appoint you to bring people to the covenant, le'or goyim, to be a light until the nations. This is two of the most important words in the entire Tanakh, that the mission of the Jewish people, really from the time of Abraham, is to bring the whole world to the covenant between human beings and God, and to be a light unto the nations. So here it's significant that this is the Haftarah, because this is the very purpose of creation. God had in mind the end game here. And the end game was that the Jewish people would become his representatives in order to bring the light of Torah to the entire world. And in the 21st verse, there is a verse here that is used in synagogues all the time, that especially there's a certain Kaddish that is said when, after learning whatever the community is learning, I have to have a minyan to say the Kaddish. And so before the Kaddish is recited, it says, Hashem chafetz leman siko yagdil Torah v'yadir. That Hashem desires, for the sake of righteousness, that the Torah be made great and glorious. This is said in shul all the time. Hashem chafetz leman siko yagdil Torah v'yadir. So this is very, very connected to this whole idea. And in fact, I'm just going to do a tease here. In the next 2 weeks, part of the Numerical Gems series, which hopefully everyone is watching, connects the creation with the giving of the Ten Commandments, the giving of the Torah. And so we see, and we'll see, I invite everyone to look at that Numerical Gems. It will be out this week or next week, that the actual purpose of creation was to bring all mankind to a moral, ethical connection with Torah. Now, one last thing for the Haftarah is a very important concept, comes in, this is already chapter 43. So it says like this, Kol hanikra b'shmi ulekavodi barativ yitzartiv af asitiv. So it says here, this is Isaiah saying, in God's name, all that is called in my name, and for the sake of my glory, I have created, one second. I'm gonna go back. All that are called in my name that I have created for my glory, I have formed it, and I have even done it. I have fashioned it and perfected it. So here, there are 3 words here: barativ, yitzartiv, asitiv. I have created, I have formed, and I have done. So for those who are familiar, we've discussed it many times. In Kabbalah, we're told that there are 4 worlds, which are really 4 levels of consciousness, and also just 4 levels how an infinite, all-powerful God can channel his energy into a physical, finite, material world. It's like a hierarchy of allowing the light to come to a place that it can be received. So these 4 worlds are called Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. This verse is the textual support for 3 of the 4 worlds. If you hear again, Barativ is Olam HaBriyah, the world of creation. Yitzartiv, this is the world of Yitzirah, of formation. Av Asitiv, I have even made it. I put it into a physical, material form, is the world of Asiyah. And God's glory, that is the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation. So this is such an important textual source for this concept of the four worlds. So that is our short review of the Haftorah for the portion of Bereshit. Okay, here we go again. Welcome everyone to our review of the Haftorah. This week, the Parsha of Noach. So everyone knows that the theme, the storyline of the Parsha of Noach is all about the flood. At the end of Parsha, other things happen also. But here, the flood is the big story of the book of the portion of Noach. And so, obviously, the Haftorah is going to have some connection. And here, I have to point out, this is a rare thing about this Haftorah. It's one of the only Haftorahs, I think there's around 3 that appear twice in the year. This Haftorah is repeated in Parsha Ki Teitzei. It's the same Haftorah, but it's there for a different purpose. In Parsha Ki Teitzei, after Tisha B'Av, from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah, there are 7 Haftorahs of consolation. The first one is called Nachamu, Nachamu. God is consoling the Jewish people. And of course, this happens right after Tisha B'Av. But all 7 weeks from Tisha B'Av till Rosh Hashanah are Haftorahs, words of the prophets of consolation. And this is one of them. But here, it's read for a different purpose. And this is from Isaiah also, the 54th chapter, verses 1 through 10. And then, according to Sfardim, Sfardim conclude after 10 verses. Ashkenazim continue for another almost 15 verses. So, towards the end of the part that everyone reads, God is consoling the Jewish people. And I'll read from the 6th verse, where it says, Ki isha azuva va'atzuvat ruach parach Hashem v'eshet nurim ki tim'es amar elokecha. So here, and we see this a lot in the books of the prophets, where the Jewish people are sometimes compared to an unfaithful wife. That we have this idea that one of the many ways that we relate to our relationship with God is that we are married to God. God is as if the husband and the Jewish people are the wife. And sometimes we haven't been so loyal. So here in the Haftorah, it says, for like a wife who has been forsaken and is of melancholy spirit, that's how Hashem will call to you. And like a wife of one's youth who had become despised. In other words, God has become upset with the Jewish people at different times in history. But look what it says next. It's a beautiful pasuk that says, Berega katon azavticha. but really only for a short moment have I abandoned you. Uberachamim gedolim akabetzcha. But with great compassion, I will gather you back to me. And then a few verses later, it says, Ki mei Noach zot li asher nishbati me'avor mei Noach od al ha'oretz kein nishbati miksof alecha mina'ar bach. So here, this is a connection to Noach. Why is this the Haftorah? So God says, just like the waters of Noach, shall this statement that I just made be to me. In other words, just like I promised never to destroy the world again, like I did at the time of Noach. It's called the waters of Noach. Here also, I also have promised really never to forsake you, never to abandon you. Even though there are times in history it appears that God is very angry with us, God hides his face from us, and sometimes terrible things happen to the Jewish people. But here, God, and he's using the imagery of just like he promised Noah never to destroy the world again, he's promising the Jewish people that no matter what happens, I will never abandon you. I will never forsake you. So that is the reason why we read it here. In Parsha Ki Teitzei, before Rosh Hashanah, we read it just for the consolation. And as we go through the Haftorah, most of the Haftorah is about consolation. Here, I want to point out just one more verse, and that's really what I can do in a short amount of time, is almost every Haftorah has some super important verse that we recognize or included in the prayers or in Jewish tradition. So here, it says like this. This is the beginning of the 55th chapter, the first verse. Hoi, kol tzama l'chu l'mayim. Asher ein lo kesef l'chu shivru v'yachlu u'l'chu shibru below kesef u'below mechir yayin v'chalav. Here it says, all who are thirsty, let them come to the water, and even those who have no money, go and eat and drink what you need without payment and without a price, wine and milk. So what is this verse really talking about? So all the commentaries say the same thing. We have this expression, Ein mayim el Torah. Anytime the word water, mayim, is mentioned in the Torah, in the prophets, it's also an allusion to Torah itself. So here it says, all who are thirsty, let them go to the water. All who are spiritually thirsty, let them come to the Torah. And even if you have no money, you have no payment, you have no merit, you like Rachav, for those who are part of the Book of Yehoshua class, just like Rachav, after an entire life of living a certain way, did tshuva, like any of us can. Like any of us, after a lifetime, we can totally change. So everyone, if you're thirsty, come to the water, come to the Torah. And you don't have to have lineage, you don't have to have money, you don't have to have merit, you don't have to have education, you don't have to have experience. You can start from scratch and you can acquire the Torah. You don't need any money. And what you'll acquire is yayin and chalav, wine and milk. These are symbolic. Yayin is the numerical value of sod. The secrets of the Torah are always compared to wine. 70 faces to the Torah. This is the wine of Torah. And chalav is white, which represents spirituality, is pure, is light. So everyone come to the Torah, and you'll end up with wine and milk. So that is a quick review of the Haftarah for the Parsha of Noach.